remote leadership actually removes a lot of that power, or the power of personality and charisma within teams. And how do we allow what we need from our members and to push that charisma out on a digital space? It becomes very, very difficult. And this is where the same over communication, I think a huge factor to play in there is empowerment.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. This is your host Neha at Leaders Hum.
peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view, integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Awards that's specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and channel, which receives more than 400,000 visitors a year, and we publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month.
We have with us today Kerron Ramganesh. Kerron is a knowledge management and digital transformation professional with a lifelong passion for influencing creative and empowered talent, as well as developing automated processes that help companies grow and prosper. He says he's been fortunate enough in his career to have been involved in operations and projects across 7 territories in the Caribbean region geared towards human capital development, enterprise resource planning systems, e-learning and AI solutions, which have accommodated much success. His focus for adding value within recent times has been within the realms of digital transformation initiatives and developing artificial intelligence models for NLP, GANs, and deep learning using Python. His areas of expertise include knowledge management, project and process management, business process reengineering, AI, data analytics, HRIS and HR analytics, team building and leadership, and much more that we can't wait to find out about. So welcome to peopleHum, Kerron. It's an absolute pleasure having you over with us today.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's definitely a pleasure to be part of the interview process.
Thank you. The pleasure's all ours. So jumping into the interview, Kerron, the first question that I want to ask you is that for the past 5 years, you've been working as an independent knowledge management and digital transformation professional. So can you share your experience with us and enlighten us on the work that you do there?
Right. Well, a lot of the work that I do revolve around data and process, and of course people. So we're looking at how do you collect the most appropriate data to actually help you make better decisions when it comes to performing your processes, as well as getting the most out of your people in your team. So a lot of my work recently has revolved around using technology to capture data, point that data to the right people or the right decision makers, as well as even developing your people, upskilling your people, or performing some kind of capacity development to ensure that they can actually utilize the data in the right way and help the organization grow. Of course, become more efficient or actually become more effective. So it depends on the goals of the organization that, a lot of my work would revolve around helping their people or improving their systems in some form or fashion.
Absolutely. The work that you do sounds very interesting, Kerron. And it's also very interesting to see how, data can be applied to people as a resource and how that can contribute to the success of any organization. So that's absolutely great.
All right, great.
So when we talk about digital transformation within the HR domain, do you see HR technology influencing the way that people processes function in the near future?
Certainly, it has a huge role to play. What happens with many processes, as we saw pre-COVID, people had all these ad hoc kind of processes. There was very little structure. Even if they did have structure with regard to the data that they have to look at and help them make their decisions, it was too, let's say, it was siloed. There were too many segmented elements. And of course, one of the pieces that I focused on is really centralizing data. And if we centralize where it's stored, the knowledge can actually be shared. There's much more value that can be generated from it. So what I usually talk about is the triple A. And the triple A really talks about analytics, automation, and AI. So if it is you are looking at digital transformation, well, I don't really use the term digital transformation much. To me, from my experience, it has more been digital transitions. So what you'll have, you'll have many processes that are manual or ad hoc. But when we come in to look at the process, look at the people, and find ways to automate it, find ways to collect data, we are really transitioning that segment. So it may be one process or a group of processes that we're really looking to manage in that way. And so analytics will help us determine what data we're collecting, what data is most useful, and how that data can drive our decisions. Automation would move us away from being transactional or that manual process where you'll spend hours doing something into mere minutes. So we can focus on more transformational work actually, so more higher level, more value. And we can use AI to help us build models and help us predict what can happen. And then of course, use the human element to help make those final decisions. So it's just like where people are scared of being replaced by machines. I think it's more about retooling the people, ensuring that our people understand their role in the process and how we can utilize AI and machine learning as additional tools that could help us along the way. So it's really all about gaining that insight on the process trends and identifying the factors that would define performance. I think that's what every organization aims to do. And because people are involved in every process, the HR role is ever prevalent there. So understanding how to maximize the people and removing some level of subjectivity from the decision-making process. And I think those are the elements that data really helps.
Absolutely, that is wonderful. And as someone who works on the analytical side of the world, I really want to mention it's very commendable how you just straight up ahead went and said that, people are also playing a very major role in everything that's happening with technology right now. And what you just mentioned about it not being a transformation but a transition, I feel like that is a very, very valid point. So thanks a lot for that, because that definitely gives a lot of insight into what is happening around us with the pandemic and how are we coping with technology.
Yeah, correct.
That's absolutely helpful.
Thank you.
So moving on, Karen, when we consider team building, how do you advise one be more conscious and open towards their colleagues' needs? So what can leaders do to facilitate that change that sort of happens?
Well, wow, we've been pushed in a corner for the last, let's say, year and a half, and it has, from what I've seen, there are many organizations here in the Caribbean that I've been recommending, moving stuff to remote learning, moving stuff to systems, automation, but they've never really, they've pretty much agreed to it, but they've never taken the step to actually get it done. And what I've realized that a lot of them, they got backed in a corner and they've now been pushing to do that. And we have to realize that behavior is something that is learned over time. It's a gradual process. And what we have workers we have team members who are now shoved to work from home. And then we have managers and supervisors who are forced to now manage them on a remote setting, which is totally different from managing people in office. And so we have instances of increased isolation, loneliness, waning motivation, and even workers actually craving more autonomy because you're at home. So what we talk about to manage a team and to consider how do we build our team, it's really accepting the fact that how we have to manage them will change. So you cannot expect to manage people remotely the same way you were managing them in office. And I think it's really all about continuous communication. I usually tell organizations, don't be afraid to over communicate, but when you are over communicating, it's really more about dialogue rather than just pushing information out or sending out instructions and that type of thing. It's really about building dialogue because we have to understand that we're all part of the transition and that emotional intelligence element when it comes to leadership would come into play. You have to understand what people are going through as well as understand what you are going through and appreciate the fact that others would be going through that same thing, that wave, that unsettling type of mood that you're actually in. So I talk about ensuring that you recognize your people, provide recognition, open the dialogue, develop your people as much as possible as well. So don't only be the person, with the whip and sending instructions. You need to do this by tomorrow. You need to do this by next week. It's really all about guiding them, mentoring them, and being there for them, because you have to understand that, they are going through a change as well. I think it really just clear goal setting. One thing I talk about with leadership a lot is that you basically can instruct people what to do, but it's not really your role to tell them how to do it. So we pretty much allow people to follow their work style, follow their pattern, follow their particular machinery, and let them get it done. And then we tweak as we go. It's really all about maximizing how they do things. So rather than getting them to follow this cookie cutter method, it's really about allowing them to adjust and transform themselves as we go, and just guide them along the way to ensure that they don't get lost. So I think that's some of my little snippet of advice that I usually give to managers and supervisors to try to help them with this transition.
Absolutely, and that's very wonderfully put, Kerron, because break room conversations have sort of vanished with the pandemic, and so many things have changed for us. So, what you just mentioned about over communicating, I absolutely love that point, because when we talk about work, and just limit it to that, it is very difficult to actually gauge the other person's mental space, or to
Yes.
understand how they're doing in their own life. But then, if you over communicate and you go beyond talking about just work, that's when I feel like you can actually bond with them. So, that's a very, very valid point that you made there.
Yes, that's a serious factor that feeds towards employee engagement, because you want them. The lines between work and home are now, I wouldn't say blurred. I would say it's pretty much gone, because you have the concept of the 8 to 4, the 9 to 5 is gone. You have employees with so much different work styles, different patterns, different commitments at home too as well. And we have to be able to help them incorporate. It's a bit more of a, what I call it, a work emotion. So remember, we talk about work-life balance.
Yeah.
And there's been enough studies that show work-life balance has always veered in the side of work. So it's more about bringing more work at home. But now that you are home and work is there, work is consistent, how do we really immerse work and balance it properly within what we have to do, juggling all the commitments that we have at home? And I realized that a lot more employees work outside of working hours rather than during working hours. So that is also an additional challenge for managers and supervisors. So I think one piece of advice I usually have is create a 24-hour cycle rather than the end of working day. So if you have an instruction, it really goes towards that 24-hour period. So you don't have, there's no let's say, excessive expectation that it has to be done by 5 p.m. But we do set a deadline, a 24-hour cycle, where you could wake up at 2 a.m. and you could get the job done.
Absolutely, but that's a very fresh perspective of looking at it, and I'm sure a lot of people have notes to take down as we're talking. So, as someone who holds expertise in leadership, would you say that there are certain tenets of it that have been newly formed because of the pandemic?
Yes, leadership is such a diverse area of study, and there's so much perspectives on it. What I've seen over the last year, driving remote teams, is really more the concept of remote leadership. So I've had to advise a lot of people in terms of the way we think of leadership. The leader has always been this kind of supernatural figure who drives everything. And of course, understanding the relationship between leaders and followers, because we have to appreciate the fact that followers define the leaders. Without people deciding to follow you, you aren't a leader. And if it is, you have to you have remote teams, and you have to lead these teams remotely. Before, in the traditional sense, we had charm, we had personality, we had presence. How do we create that type of presence? And I think a huge element here is the fact that remote leadership actually removes a lot of that power, or the power of personality and charisma within teams. And how do we allow what we need from our members and to push that charisma out on a digital space? It becomes very, very difficult. And this is where the same over communication, I think a huge factor to play in there is empowerment. because you aren't there, you aren't present to really influence. But through your communication, through your instruction, through the right type of relationship building, you are empowering your people. So the onus is now more on your followers to get the job done rather than you as the leader really driving or influencing that change. So the balance has shifted a bit. So like if we think about systems where we had the mainframe system way back in the day, and then it came to more powerful client systems, that's what you're kind of thinking about because your people aren't just there to perform mundane tasks. They're more empowered now to do what they need to do. So I think as a leader, it's really more about embracing what they can bring to the table and giving them a bit more power to wield and let them decide where to go with it. So I think embracing difference, like what I was talking about earlier with work styles, morning people, evening people, different commitments, and these things. I think if we empower and we embrace the fact that everybody works differently, we can actually drive performance and even innovation in ways that they would have never thought about in the traditional sense of the office.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's wonderful to see how, leadership, even though it seems like such a universal concept, is interpreted differently, not just by different people, but also at different times within different timelines. Because, say, 10 years ago, leadership must have meant something entirely different. But today, a lot of people look at a leader as someone who can influence them and someone who, they feel is close to them and someone who willingly wants to follow into their footsteps rather than, just be intimidated by them. So I feel like that's a great shift right there, as, very wonderfully put forward by you.
Yes. I think just to add to that, when we talk about culture, because you can't really talk about leadership without culture. And from what I've seen, like in the Caribbean region versus the North American type of culture, in the Caribbean, there's very little power distance. So what happens is that you can have conversations with your manager, supervisor, even executive, and you're going to be on a first name basis. There's, not like other cultures where you have to say, Mr. Singh and that type of stuff. So within our culture, it's slightly easier to transition to a sense if you have the right style, but if you don't, the resistance is pretty high. So it's really a kind of hit or miss when it comes to our culture here in the Caribbean. The way that we are actually touchy-feely people, we love to be in the presence of others. So I think trying to help people adjust to that change has been one of the most difficult elements within my job, especially when it comes to culture and the way we perceive leadership in the Caribbean territories.
Absolutely. No, culture definitely does play a role, but it's very important and also very interesting to note how there are certain things that lie at the foundation of that. And well, if you approach those things properly, everything else will just sort itself out. And that's actually a very hopeful thought, especially in today's pandemic-ridden times.
Correct.
And with that, I want to ask you lastly, do you have a quote that describes your feelings the best way towards the future of work, workplace, and you?
Yes, there are tons of quotes actually. So actually, Dr. Ritesh Malik, he's the CEO at Innovate Co-working. He put it really nicely in a way that I've always been kind of preaching to people, where it comes to AI, machines, automation, the use of technology, and where we're thinking that we're going to be replaced at some form or the other. He spoke about the future of work isn't about displacement of work by machines, but of course rather to do more with restructuring of the human skill set. And I've always tied it back to, let's say, typewriters, scrolls to typewriters to laptops. The way we communicate, the way we generate knowledge, the way we share knowledge hasn't really the knowledge itself hasn't changed. The way in which we think as humans, the way in which we bring that together through communication. It's really more about the tools and the skill sets that we require to get it done. So in terms of rather than people thinking that they're going to be sent home, if we start AI and we start using a lot more tech, it's really more about getting those people to now manage that tech rather than, manually doing the work. So to me, it's really all about thinking about it as a collaborative or symbiotic type of relationship rather than, one is going to replace the other. Because at the end of it, a lot of my work revolves around decision making and ensuring that we all in an organization within our roles and responsibilities make the best decision possible. We are now in an era where we have tools that can really help us and really drive that decision making down a path where we could get the most value. So I think, he really hit the nail on the head when it comes to retooling people rather than thinking about replacing people. Because I think if it is you are thinking about replacing people, your business is already going down a very sordid path. And if we think that people shouldn't have an important role to play with technology, I think we have much more of a significant role now, especially with technology, because we need to harness that properly, and we need to deal with it, from an ethical perspective and all these things, to really ensure that we maximize it and do the right thing with it, because that is a lot of power, and we really need to be much more responsible with it.
Absolutely, Ken. And that coming from someone such as you, who's very well versed in analytics and the world of digital transformation, I feel like that means a lot to a lot of our viewers and listeners, because we have certainly been at a point in life where it has been very difficult for some people to adjust to that technology, and I'm sure that all of us have had our inhibitions about whether this technology that's advancing by the day is going to take over people as a resource. So what you just mentioned about, learning how to handle it, I feel like that's absolutely wonderful. And this entire conversation was so insightful, Kerron. Thanks a lot for being here and talking to us today. It was wonderful speaking to you.
You're welcome. Happy to contribute towards the discussion.
Thank you. See you again.
All right, take care.
You too.